If you are a caregiver to your spouse who can no longer take care of himself or is suffering from Alzheimer's or mild dementia, you are most likely asking yourself a lot of questions. For example, my mate has dementia. What should I do? Should I put him in a care home? It takes a lot to look after an adult that needs special care or is suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. Not only is it a lot of physical labor, but it's a lot of mental stress as well. It's an emotional roller coaster. You can become very exhausted quickly, and then you're of no help to anyone. If you think you can cope with some help, many care homes have respite where they look after the resident for 1 week every month. Or there may be other plans as well. Talk with your care facility and your doctor to find out what the best solution is for you. Now that your spouse is in a care home, he wants to come home with you. You feel guilty, like as if you've abandoned him. It breaks your heart every time he says, I want to go home. But sometimes home can mean something very different. It can mean a home that he had in his youth, a home that he grew up in. Don't forget, his mind is not working the way yours does, and his memory is a lot different. Mrs. Smith, number 2, that I looked after, they were keeping her in her own home. And a lot of times they say this is best because it creates so much confusion when they're moved. So they like to try and keep them in their own home as long as possible. She would get up in the night and then she'd go down to the first floor, take all of her clothes off, and then throw them in the washing machine. And that's the way you'd find her walking the hall, no clothes on. It didn't matter how you tried to lock the door, she knew how to unlock it. She knew her name, but that was about all she did know. Other than that, anything else was more like habit. And I tried everything. Then one day decided to do something different. I put a chair in front of her door, and that was enough that she never tried even unlocking the door or the deadbolt. With the chair there, it was just enough to confuse her that she couldn't remember where the door was. Number 1 rule is never argue with them. That gets them agitated. They're likely to become violent, which this Mrs. Smith did get violent, not with me, but with a couple of the other caregivers, because they argued with her. If she did something, they'd say, no, that's wrong. There was times where she'd put her foot in her purse, thinking that it was her shoes. She would start getting upset and really angry. So it was time for me to intervene. And so I would say to her, well, maybe your feet are a little swollen. Why not try these shoes on instead? And then I'd hand her her shoes and she'd be fine. She'd get her shoes on, no problem. Many times she wanted to go home, but the home she was talking about, it was one from her childhood. You can't argue. You have to divert their thinking. Another thing that she liked to do was try baking a cake. She'd take the pan and then she'd take a tea towel and fold it up and then put it in the oven. I had the power turned off to the stove all the time. So there was never a problem of safety. Then when she'd think the cake was ready, I'd tell her, well, I'll get it out of the oven for you. Why don't you go sit down and I'll cut you a piece of cake and bring it to you. And of course, I always had cake there. So I just cut her a piece of cake and take it to her. And she thought that she had baked it. So there's always different ways that you can work around without agitating them. Okay, I'm going to pose a question to you. What are you doing right now? Are you sitting here listening to me talk and watching my video? Are you sure that that's what you're doing? Or is that just in your mind? That's a scary question, isn't it? But to someone who has dementia or Alzheimer, whatever they're doing, they think is right. It's only us who see that they're not doing things right. So that's why I ask you, are you sure you're watching this video? Or do you just think you're watching it? Thanks for watching, everyone.